The following live presentation was recorded at a conference sponsored by FAIR, the Foundation for Apologetic Information and Research. The views expressed by the presenter should not be construed as official doctrine of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, nor do they necessarily represent the official opinions of FAIR. For further information, please visit the FAIR website at www.fairlds.org. We hope you enjoy this presentation.
Speaker is Gary Lawrence. Gary Lawrence is a public opinion pollster and the author of How Americans View Mormonism, 7 Steps to Improve Our Image. Received a BA from BYU in Political Science and a Ph.D. from Stanford University in Communication programs that emphasize the study of attitudes, how they formed, how they are measured, and how they are changed. He has his own research firm, and you can read the rest of his bio in our program. We're very pleased to have Gary Lawrence.
Thank you, Scott, and it's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you very much for coming. I hope by the time we roll around to 10 minutes before 10, you will have found your investment of time worthwhile. When I was called on my mission to Germany, my father, who served his mission in Australia, said, "You're very fortunate to go out at a time when the church no longer does street meetings." Street meetings, as you know, were patterned after the Speaker's Corner of Hyde Park in London and consisted of going out with an orange crate, standing on it, having an opening prayer, an opening song, giving a couple of talks. The two missionaries would then wrap it up with another song that they sang by themselves and another prayer, and that was the end of it. My father said I felt like a nut. And he was quite sure that the people streaming by would not have disabused him of his self-perception. This is how he felt. Have we been there? Yes, we have. How many of you have served a full-time mission for the church, including stake missions as they were once called? How many of you continue to do missionary work like you were taught to do on your missions? Good for you. Most people, when I ask that question, they don't. And the reason is that they try to find something that is more in tune with their own personality. How many of you are in that situation? We like to find something that doesn't take us out of our comfort zone. And what I'd like to do is share with you a few things today that might help you in that endeavor. As I go around the church, I ask mission presidents, stake presidents, bishops, ward mission leaders, how many of your members are actively trying to do missionary work? What percentage? And I have yet to hear a double-digit number. Most of it comes in at about 7%. So that means 93% of our members are really overwhelmed with the idea of taking the gospel to every nation, kindred, tongue, and people. Sort of the gargantuan task of trying to find the humor section in a government bookstore. The other 7% are outgoing, garrulous, gregarious, meet anybody, sort of like Scott Gordon, right? Could sell hamburgers at a Hindu wedding. But most of us can't and most of us won't. So what is there that we as normal, regular members could do to help advance the work without standing on our orange crate and without having to leave our comfort zone? May I suggest a few things and pick and choose the ones that fit into your personality? Number one, we have to know the situation. I had my firm conduct a survey of 1,000 randomly chosen American adults about 2 years ago. And we asked them a whole series of questions that I've always been aching to ask people about the church over my career as a public opinion pollster. Let's take a look at where we are. We tend to think, well, the people may not be beating a path to our door, but they respect what we Mormons are trying to do. Baloney. They don't. We're upside down. 37% favorable and a 49% unfavorable impression. Now look how that compares to the Jewish people, who have almost a 7-to-2 positive to negative ratio. Baptists not far behind. The Catholics almost 2-to-1 favorable, and we're upside down. The only people that we beat are the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Muslims. And notice the deeper colors of red and green. Almost 5 times as many people have a strongly unfavorable impression of us rather than a strongly favorable impression by a 5-to-1 ratio. In other words, we are upside down. We have a lot to do to improve our image. Now, what are the causes of it? First of all, we are in an approach avoidance situation. You can see the statistics here where a good number of people, at least 3 out of 4 people, will attribute to us the kinds of words and phrases that are listed here on the positive side. And from a list of about 50 words and phrases, we had people say whether it describes Mormons or does not describe Mormons. So note the positives on the one hand, and note the negatives on the other. Where we're blind followers, we keep to ourselves, narrow-minded, fanatical, brainwashed by our leaders, and so forth. Now, when you have a high number of percentage of people with the positives, and also a very relatively substantial number of people with the negatives, it shows you that a lot of people are cross-pressured. It's an approach avoidance, a love-hate relationship. They'd like to believe certain things about us, but they hear other things about us. Now, the one thing that I didn't put here on the slide is that 55% of all Americans do not believe that we are, 55% believe that we are seekers of truth, which means that 45% don't believe we're even seeking the truth, let alone entertain the thought that we have the truth. We've got a long ways to go. Now, a lot of this comes with a misperception of what is known as a faith community. And obviously, when they have perceptions about us on polygamy and several other things, they're getting us mixed in with the nutcakes in West Texas and on the Utah-Arizona border, because they do the same thing that we do to other religions. How many of you make a distinction between, say, a Southern Baptist and an American Baptist? But Baptists make that distinction. We don't. We look at them as just one faith family. Same thing with evangelical Lutherans versus Lutherans Missouri Synod. We don't make a distinction internally to them. Lutherans are Lutherans. In the same way, people are thinking, well, Mormons are Mormons. It's up to us to tell them that there is a distinction. There are 150 breakaway groups, splinter groups from our church, and we have nothing to do with them. Until we make that point very firmly, we're going to continue to have some problems. Now, let's take a look at the ignorance that's out there. We asked people whether they'd ever had people come to their door, whether they'd ever read any Mormon literature, whether they'd ever seen any TV ads from the Mormon church. And we found that 84% have. Marketers would call that an 84% penetration. But then we also had asked them, to the best of your understanding, what is the main claim of Mormonism? If they said restoration, restored gospel, reestablished, original church, or it was brought back, there was a falling away, even if they used the word apostasy, which most people don't in day-to-day conversation. We gave them credit for having a correct answer. How many? 14%. No, unaided, our main claim to be the restored church. 2% of our sample were LDS, so we're down to 12%. We then read them the statement. Had you ever heard that Mormons claim to be the restored gospel, the reestablished church, etc.? 29%. We've been doing missionary work for 180 years. I say the delivery vehicles are arriving, but the freight isn't being offloaded. And that's our fault. There's a high uncertainty. Now, we ask people whether Mormons believe the Bible, whether they believe that Mormons are Christians, whether they practice polygamy. And we gave them a 4-part set of answers. Definitely yes, probably no, definitely no. So if we take, say, a situation like, do Mormons believe the Bible? 33% said definitely yes, which means that some people say probably yes, they were uncertain. If they felt that we do not, or if they're undecided, they're also part of that uncertainty factor. So we have a 67% uncertainty factor among adult Americans on whether we believe the Bible. That uncertainty factor is 77% on whether we're Christians, and it's 85% on whether we practice polygamy. When you have an uncertainty factor that has those kinds of substantial majorities, it's very difficult for people to say, I'm going to ignore it all and I'm going to investigate them anyway. They're not going to investigate the church until they get that uncertainty level down, at least in their own minds. We think we're known But 37% of Americans do not know a Mormon. And 55% have never met anybody like you. A majority of Americans do not know an active LDS member. I found out some very interesting things when I went out doing focus groups, and I've been doing them for the church as part of a calling for 20 some odd years. Focus groups, of course, bring people together for 2 hours. We probe into their minds to figure out what they believe and what they don't. And I said, how many of you know a Mormon? And a few hands went up. And so I asked a young man, I think this was in Minneapolis where this one happened. I asked a young man, tell me about the Mormon you know best. And he had a big smile on his face. I thought I was going to get a great answer. He said, well, that would be Bill. And I said, well, and we all love Bill. I said, well, why do you love Bill? And he said, well, because he can hold more beer than any of us. Now think about it. When was the last time you took somebody from another faith out to dinner, to a ball game, to some kind of a social event? We tend to group with it, and we're not different. Most people of similar value structures tend to cluster together with people of those same value structures. And who has the most friends in other faiths? An active member or a less active member? And it's the Bills of our faith, who may not be living up to all of the standards that they should, who have more friends in other faiths than we do. We are being represented by our least prepared members. So we have two choices. We either work on the Bills of the church, or we get us out into knowing more people. Now take a look at these numbers. If people know many Mormons, they have a 53% favorable. Remember, the average across the whole nation is 37%. So if they know a lot of us, we've got a 53% favorable. If they know several of us, it's a 40% favorable. If they know one or two of us, it's a 30% favorable. And if they don't know any of us, does it go back up or go back down? It goes up. We're better off if they don't know any of us than if they know one or two. So we've got a lot of work to do. So the suggestion is we've got to get out in the community. Now, we've heard that many, many times, but most of the time it's with an agenda. We've got to get out in the community so that we can help people join the church. And I'm saying, no, relax. Let's get out in the community. Let's associate with an organization, American Cancer Society, a Philharmonic Music Society, a PTA, whatever it is, simply because we believe in their cause and what they're trying to accomplish. And we make friends, not so that we can lead them to the waters of baptism. That would be wonderful if we could, but simply to be their friend. Can we do that? You know, I take a look at a couple of examples in the scriptures. When Paul was on his second missionary journey in 53 AD, he went to Athens. We know the story. He didn't get off the boat and start knocking on doors. He walked around the city and he observed. Peter Drucker talked about it several years ago as managing by walking around, observing. And what did Paul observe? He observed that the Athenians gathered together to discover some new thing. It's sort of, what's up? What's going on? And number two, they had in their polytheistic pantheon of gods a statue to the unknown God, lest they offend some one of them. And so he put the two things together. We know the story. He had then a platform that he could use to say, let me tell you about your unknown God. He tied in with society. What did Ammon do? Stepped across the boundary into King Lamoni's Lamanite kingdom, was captured. 3 days later found himself, after turning down an offer to marry Lamoni's daughter, found himself out there tending the sheep. And what did he do? He looked around. He watched the society. He understood the dynamics of what was going on, that the thugs would scatter the king's sheep. And when they did, he saw an opportunity. After applying the first arms control measures in history, he then had a lot of people he could talk to, and you know how the story goes from there. Are we doing that same thing? Instead of going in with a cookie-cutter method, a formula of saying this is what we have to do, let's just go out and look around and see what we might learn. Can we find people? D&C 123. There are many yet on the earth, among all sects, parties, and denominations, blinded by the subtle craftiness of men, who are only kept from knowing the truth because they know not where to find it. Let's emphasize a couple of things. Many on the earth, among all sects, parties, and denominations. Baptists, Catholics, Lutherans, Presbyterians, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, Ladies' Garden Club, you name it. Wherever you decide to get out into the community and join with somebody in some cause, you will find people who are looking for the truth. And we come now from a wide variety of backgrounds. I say that any church that can have Glenn Beck and Harry Reid as active members is a full big tent religion. Let's change our thinking. Let's consider the oblique nature of the gospel. Christ said, those who would be first shall be last, the last shall be first. Those who would exalt themselves must be abased. Those who would base themselves and humble themselves shall be exalted. It's the oblique nature of the gospel. So if you pursue your own happiness directly, what will happen? You will find that it's elusive. But if you pursue somebody else's happiness, yours will come as a natural byproduct. Maybe it's that same way in growing the church. If we pursue baptisms directly, people can smell it. And it's going to be elusive to you. But if you just go out to be friendly and help in the community and make it a better place to live, wonderful things start to happen. The immediate goal is not referrals and baptisms. The immediate goal is spreading information and correcting distortions and improving the understanding of us. So how do we start off? First of all, you just have to signal your affiliation in a way that doesn't make anybody uncomfortable or cringe factor. Now, many of your friends might know you already as LDS, but if you're joining another group to help out and just be part of the community, you might find something useful that I call a parenthetical mention. That's where you choose something in your life that identifies you as LDS. Maybe you speak a foreign language. Maybe you came into the church as an adult. Maybe who knows what it might be. There's a way that you can drop that into a conversation without it being the main point in the conversation. It's parenthetical to everything else. And as you drop it in, one thing that I used is had to run up to Salt Lake the other day, do some business, got through earlier than I thought with my client and said goodbye to him, called my daughter who goes to BYU and said, let's go skiing. Went up to Sundance and Great Powder. Now note the different conversational paths I put on the table. And he can choose whatever he wants to talk about. Let him control the conversation. And even if he doesn't bring up anything about the church, are you Mormon? I've at least planted the idea that I might be. And the next time he has a question about Mormonism, I just might be the one he asks. Number 5, and this is going to be the critical one that gets us out of our, that expands our comfort zone, so we're not leaving our comfort zone. We take advantage of a lot of things that are out there. And these are a couple of years old examples, but there's a PBS series that got a lot of people talking about us. Look for the buzz. Mormon in the White House might come up again in 2012. If it doesn't, I'd be surprised that because of all of the chips that Mitt Romney is placing out there, appearing in every congressional district he possibly can. The Straw Man Anti-Mormon DVD that's been floating around. And then movies from September Dawn to Georgia Rules and who knows what else is coming. There are many opportunities for us to use what's in the news to make a comment about our church. Love Reverend Al Sharpton. After he said this, the church invited him out here to Salt Lake and gave him the red carpet tour. It was wonderful. I wish Al Sharpton would go back to the way he was doing things, because every time somebody criticizes us, they have expanded our circle, and it makes it more comfortable for us to answer. The church grows when it's persecuted. Welcome buzz about us. Welcome criticism about us, because it gives us opportunities. You know, in my previous company, which was LDS owned, we had a graphic designer that we hired, and he was virulently anti-Mormon. Every Saturday morning, he'd be out on Santa Monica Boulevard picketing in front of the Los Angeles Temple. It's fine, he can do whatever he wants in his free time. He was a good enough graphic artist that we kept him on. And one Friday night, as we were wrapping up work, I just sort of offhandedly said, Well, John, see you tomorrow at the temple. And he had this blank look on his face. He couldn't understand why I would say something like that. So I finally clued him out. I said, John, figure it out. Which is the greater roadblock to the growth of the LDS Church? Antagonism or apathy? It's apathy. So every car that goes up and down Santa Monica Boulevard and sees your placard about Satan and Jesus and whether they're brothers or not is going to say, I wonder what that's all about. You're helping us overcome apathy. Keep up the good work. He quit picketing about 2 months later. Cut the jargon. A moment ago I said from the Doctrine and Covenants section 123 that people know not where to find the truth, not to know the truth because they know not where to find it. And why do they know not where to find it? And it's very simple, because we haven't told them in words they understand. Now, what language did Peter, James, and John speak when they restored the Melchizedek priesthood? What language did John the Baptist speak when he restored the Aaronic priesthood? Aramaic, Hebrew, English? I don't know. And you know, it doesn't really matter whether they spoke English so Joseph Smith could understand it, or they spoke Aramaic or Hebrew and Joseph Smith heard English. It doesn't matter. What happened was the end result. Joseph Smith heard English. So sometimes when we say something, we think we're communicating, but it's not the case until the person understands what we understand. And here's my favorite phrase. The gospel has been restored and the keys of the priesthood are again on the earth. It gives us a good, warm, fuzzy feeling. We love to say that. We think we're communicating, but we're not. In a score of focus groups, I tested it so much that Salt Lake said, enough already, we got the point. But what I tested was, I asked people of other faiths, what do you understand by the word gospel? Half of the people said, well, that's Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They got gospel mixed up with gospels. About another third said, well, it's the good news of Christ's mission. And technically that is absolutely correct as far as it goes. But only about 10 or 15% of the people understand the word gospel the way we understand the word gospel, which is the totality of Christianity. The authority, the doctrines, the teachings, the ordinances. So now let's turn to the word restored. When I ask what people understand by the word restored, they would always give some kind of an example that involved an object, a physical object. It's what you do to Grandpa's old 66 Mustang that's been sitting out in the shed for 20 years. You restore the car. It's what you do to Grandma's dining room table. You sand it down, you restain it, you revarnish it. You have restored Grandma's table. So I keep wondering, when we say the gospel has been restored, do we say that Matthew has a new coat of paint? It doesn't come across unless we say it in words they understand. May I suggest these words? Jesus Christ organized a church. Men changed it. We don't use the word apostasy in day-to-day conversation. It has been reestablished. If we can get that simple set of phrases across, we will have accomplished a great amount of work. If you want to put it in one sentence, we claim to be the reestablished original Christian church. Even an atheist can understand those words. Someone without any religious background at all can understand that concept. Christ organized a church. Men changed it. It has been brought back. Very simple. Now note also, I say we claim to be. We could say we are, and that would be true, but you're going to get a little tension on that. Could we cut this feedback here a little bit?
Work the mic a little closer, it'll make it easier.
Okay, there we go. We claim to be the reestablished original Christian church. Now, whether I say we are or we claim to be, I'm getting a certain point across, and the point has to do with people can dispute our claim, but they cannot dispute the fact that we make the claim. So therefore, people can look at it and start to treat it as if it's almost a third-party kind of a situation, and it's not quite as pressured or threatening to them than if we say we are. And here's what we want to do, and it all has to do with mental mailboxes. Everybody has a whole bunch of mental mailboxes in their minds, and in these mailboxes, they collect certain pieces of information. We have thousands of them. Some of them might be about the world, about food, about football, about technology, and about religions. In 98% of American minds, there is a mental mailbox with the word Mormonism on it. And if we were to open up that mailbox and look at it, we would find a whole bunch of little notes that they've collected over the years. Polygamy, Salt Lake, Golden Bible, Weird, David Archuleta, Bonnie and Marie, Bill Marriott, a whole variety of things, but they wouldn't have an orienting piece of information. And we want to put that orienting piece of information in their heads so that if they will know what we claim to be, they then might be interested in what we have to say. Now, we have to know where people are. Traditionally, we have used a 3-step model: find, teach, and baptize. That doesn't quite work, because there's a big step before we find somebody, there's a big step before they're ready to be taught, and there's a big step between being taught and being baptized. I suggest a 6-step model that a convert who comes into the church and sticks is going to have to go through. Awareness. And we tested where people are on all of these 6 steps by asking them a series of questions, and we could categorize them where they are. 40% of Americans, the only thing they know about us is that we exist. They're just simply aware of us, and it's nothing more than that. The second group is those who are awakening. I seem to be seeing a lot in the papers recently about Mormons, whether it's Romney or whether it's some controversy, maybe it's our participation in Proposition 8, whatever it might be. I'm starting to feel a little bit more there's something going on with the Mormons. I'm awakening to that fact. And during the 2008 political campaign, of course, the comment going around is this is going to be a historic election. We're either going to elect the first black, the first woman, or the first Mormon as president. And as one wag put it, why don't we all vote for Gladys Knight and get all 3? The third stage is curiosity. And I submit this is really the hinge stage, because it's at this point, they're already aware, they're already awakened, they start to have a curiosity. I wonder what Mormons think about X. I'll come back to it. Then comes interest with 5% of the people, and with 9% of the people. Then comes the investigation stage with 5% of the people, where people said, I can see myself seriously investigating the Mormon Church at some time in my life. 1 person out of 20 puts themselves in that category. And then the last group, of course, are the 2% who are already in the church. We have 25% of all Americans are either curious, interested, or ready to investigate. That's quite a bunch of people, if we can find them. Here's the difference. A curious person will ask questions. An interested person will listen. An investigator will study. So what usually happens? What usually happens is the member has a friend who asks a question about the church. The member who has always felt bad because they've never been able to give the missionaries a name thinks to herself or himself, yay, here's my opportunity. And so the person asks a question, and the member says, well, I've got a couple of young men who could explain that to you if you'd like. Would you like them to come by? And the friend says, no, okay, I guess that wouldn't hurt. And so now he or she's ready to have a visit from the missionaries, thinking they're going to have a conversation. The member feels great because now he or she doesn't have to study his shoelaces when the bishop asks for a missionary experience. And what happens when you give the name to the missionaries? Elder, we've got an investigator. This is going to be great. So you go in to that meeting and you'll pass like ships in the night because you've got a curiositator who's ready for a conversation, and you've got the missionaries who think they have an investigation. Do you wonder why we have such a drop down from first visits to second visits? We're not listening. We don't understand the person. We don't understand where they are. Where is their mental head? That's what we have to look at. Let's say something. I love this statistic. We found that of all Americans, 65 million Americans, 30%, would be willing to find out more about Mormonism if we could meet two conditions. Number one, they could learn it from a friend, and number two, they would not feel any pressure to join. Could we do that much? That's too much to ask. There are so many people out there who are afraid to ask us questions because they're afraid of being pressured. If we relax, baptisms aren't our direct goal, they're an oblique goal, we can make some progress. I want to just take a moment here and tell you of a couple of situations where people who just said something. There was a young man working in a grocery store in Huntington Beach, California, working his way through college, and a few months after he joined the workforce, the boss hired a young lady who was in high school, and she was LDS. And the kids found it out at work, and they started to tease her, and she did her best to try to explain things. In fact, even passed out some literature, and my friend read that literature and came to her one day and said, "There's no way in the world that Joseph Smith was a prophet. There's absolutely no way in the world that your church can be the true church." What did the girl say? Profound statement in the mode of Demosthenes or Cicero. She said, "Well, it either is or it isn't." He said, "I couldn't get that phrase out of my mind. For 3 weeks, it pounded on my mind. It either is or it isn't." Finally, I had to decide whether it is. You can guess the story. He converted himself, served a mission to New Zealand. About the same time, 20 miles away, in Anaheim, a young man was walking down the halls of the high school and happened to simply overhear a Mormon girl say to her friends, "I can't imagine getting married anywhere but in the temple." And he said to me, "I couldn't get that thought out of my head. I thought about it for weeks. What's so special about a temple? Why not a cathedral, a church, on the beach at sunset?" So I decided to better check it out. He investigated, he joined, and he served a mission in the Philippines. And no, I'm going to disappoint you. They did not come back and marry the girls involved in this. In fact, I think one of the girls doesn't even know what happened. But the first person is on the High Council of the Orange, California Stake. And the second person is our second counselor in the stake presidency. All because two girls said something. And they hadn't planned it. It wasn't, I said, brilliant or profound. They simply said what popped into their minds. Let's correct distortions. And this is a wonderful, wonderful situation. People have a right to their own opinions about us, but not to their own facts. It's one thing to go out there and give your opinion, and that's usually when we feel ourselves standing on an orange crate. But when we're just going out to give facts, that's when we can say it and never leave our comfort zone. Listen to what people are talking about at the water cooler as you're talking with them. Just listen to what they're talking about. Watch for news articles and segments about us. They'll give you a springboard idea of a comment to make. Now look for a distortion. All Mormons practice polygamy. Find a comfortable way to respond without being offensive or threatening. Apathy is a greater enemy than antagonism. Be thankful for negatives. As Shakespeare said in As You Like It, sweet are the uses of adversity. Adversity gives us opportunities and expands our comfort zone. You don't have to stand on an orange crate. You don't have to leave your comfort zone. you can work within your comfort zone. And here's the wonderful thing about it. When somebody criticizes our church, or any church, it's American fair play that they will expect you, not just allow you, but they will expect you to defend your religion. It's going to be welcomed, or at least it will be tolerated, and at least you will not feel that you've left your comfort zone. They will expect you to correct any distortions that are out there. It's American fair play. Now, let's take a look at a concept in the gospel that begins with 2 Nephi 2, that there must necessarily be an opposition in all things, good and evil, sense and sensibility. Otherwise, all things are compound in one. God doesn't exist, we don't exist, and so on. You know the scripture. Well, there are two cousins to opposition, and it's differences and contrast. And my point is, differentiating messages motivate where similarity messages do not. This is a picture of the Newport Beach Temple. And when we had the open house there, our hosts and hostesses reported that the single most frequently asked question after they got asking what's the difference between this, the stake center, and the temple, or what is it made of and how much did it cost, the single question that popped up the most was, what's the difference between your church and mine? People are interested in differences. They are not interested in sameness. You can say, we're Christians, and they'll say, that's nice. You can say, we believe the Bible, that's nice. You haven't given them any differentiating information. So let's take a look at some ideas here and how we might respond. Mormons aren't Christians. How do we usually respond? Well, we are too. Look at our first article of faith. Look at our name. Look at what's written on every building. And it gets into, no, you're not. Yes, we are. No, we're not. The best you can do is get back to zero. Well, why don't we give them a differentiating piece of information, something that they can think about for a while? Why would we claim to be the original of something if we're not at least the something? Now you've given them something to think about. You've given them a differentiating message, and it will work on them. Our job is not to convince or persuade. That's the Holy Ghost's job. Our job is to put information in people's mental mailboxes so the Holy Ghost has something to testify to. Let's take another one. Mormons don't believe the Bible. How do we usually answer that? We do too. We accept the King James Bible version in English, the Martin Luther translation in German. We teach it 2 years out of 4 in our Sunday school classes. Of course we believe the Bible. It doesn't get you anywhere. Why not say, of course we believe the Bible. Our members wrote it. Is that a true statement? Every piece of scripture, perhaps except for Song of Solomon, was written by a person who held the Melchizedek priesthood. Who holds it today? And what it does is it gives you an opportunity. Did I say Mormons wrote the Bible? No. I said our members wrote the Bible. Members of what? Members of the Church of Jesus Christ wrote the Bible. We are the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Here gives us an opportunity to talk about those 4 funny words at the end of our title. As opposed to manifestations of Christianity in other periods of time. The Church of Jesus Christ in the Savior's time, in New Testament time, saints simply being members. So we're talking about the Church of Jesus Christ with today's members, Church of Jesus Christ in New Testament day members, in Moses' day members, in Abraham's day members, in Noah's day members. They only had 8. In Adam's day members. Does it make sense that God the Father and Jesus Christ the Son would have taught 2 different religions? No. They taught Adam and Eve Christianity. Christianity did not start in 30 AD. Here's some more facts you can give them. It did not even start with Adam. When did it start? At the Giddy-up, before the foundations of the world. Now you're into a situation where you're explaining things, and now it starts to make sense. We claim to be the Reestablished original Christian church. In other words, we are Christianity in today's manifestation. And if that strikes you as being sort of from the Orrin Porter Rockwell School of Diplomacy, here's a softer way to do it. We claim to be followers of the same religion as those who wrote it. You're still giving them something interesting to think about. A final item. Mormons practice polygamy. You got to hit it straightforward and explain to them that there are over 150 different groups who have broken away from our church, and some of them practice it. We have nothing to do with them. We have no more responsibility for them than Catholics have responsibility for Lutherans. They broke away. And I have a friend who's sitting there in the fourth row who has his own way of saying it, and he puts a little bit of humor to it. If I wanted to be quickly excommunicated from my church, I would practice polygamy, because all other sins take longer. Success is not telling people what to think, but giving them something to think about. Let's shake up the stereotypes. And then the final suggestion, relax and be yourself. The thing about this came up to me one time when my daughter was on a trip to Portland, on a business trip, and she was hoping that she'd have one of those plane experiences that you hear about in General Conference. And so she sat in the middle seat, and soon a man sat next to her on the aisle seat, and she was wondering, I wonder if the conversation is going to start up. And she got the impression as they took off, just pull out your young women's lesson that you're preparing for next Sunday and study it. And so she did. And the thing was maintaining chastity through righteous living. And no, she didn't go like this. She just was herself, naturally studying the lesson. Pretty soon, this good Catholic man from Kansas City with 2 teenage boys looked over and saw it, and then started a 2-hour discussion. My daughter was the first Mormon that the man had ever met. Did it lead to a referral? No. Did it lead to a baptism? No. That wasn't her intention. What she did was just put some information in his head. And guess what? The next Mormon he meets will put a little information, then the next one a little more, and pretty soon you've got a critical mass and maybe something good will happen. But she didn't go in with an agenda. She was simply herself. Listen for a prompting of what to say or do. Let the person control the conversation. Let's not lead them down some mental cattle chute. That's manipulative, and we must not be manipulators. Don't try to hit a home run. It'd be nice if you could meet somebody and escort them all the way through the lessons to baptism, but this game's made up of scratch singles and bunts and sacrifice flies. Be a gardener, not an engineer. I love you engineers. Thank you for the freeways and the power plants. But when it comes to people, we're dealing with living things. Seed must be planted, it must be watered, it must be cultivated, it must be weeded. You can't plant the seed today and harvest tomorrow. We all know the rules. Work from your comfort zone. We could spend another half hour on how to do it with today's technology. You probably figured out your own ways. Where your friend is in his or her comfort zone and you remain in your comfort zone. Remember, half of all Americans have never met an active Mormon. I believe the Lord is hastening his work, and I believe that the church is coming out of obscurity. At this point, let me take any questions that you might have. Jan, have you collected any? Which general authority is most likely to give this talk in General Conference? Choose your favorite. What is your opinion of the church's internet advertising efforts to promote the church in several U.S. cities? Anything and everything that we can do would be wonderful. And I also am a firm believer in D&C 58. Do many things of your own free will and choice. And things are going to happen. This technology was not put on the earth. Computers were not allowed to be invented by the Savior just so you could track the trajectory of missiles. It was made for many things having to do with the church. People say we're not entirely honest in explaining our religion. How do you suggest we handle that? By being absolutely honest in whatever we say. And admit that we've made mistakes in the past. I mean, we had baseball conversions in the 1960s when we baptized little kids. That was a mistake. We recognize it as a mistake. Sometimes we were afraid that, we're having an agenda. Be yourself. And if people say, well, you're just trying to get me interested in the church, we say, sure I am. But you can't be interested unless you want to be. I'm your friend, and we have to show it. And if somebody doesn't come along, you're still their friend. Does the church have you speak to new mission presidents? No, not currently. I talk to a lot of mission presidents after they're out there facing the battles. Our current proselyting focus runs somewhat counter to your data. Good observation. The percentages didn't add up to 100%, did they? Who were the rest? They were the 8% who gave us a no opinion, so we weren't able to categorize them. How does the current missionary program fit with what you have found? I just say there, the Lord lets us try things out on our own. I mean, it started with the street meetings that I told you about my dad had, and it actually ended up giving the church a bad image. A couple of nuts sitting out on the corner in Brisbane, Australia. It didn't work the way it worked at Speaker's Corner, and so we gravitated away from it. And then, we weren't organized enough, so now came the Anderson Plan of the 1950s, and came the 6 lesson plans where it was Herr Brown, and my mission, Mr. Brown, back and forth, Q&A, and even to the point where some missionaries who, you not only have to memorize what you want to say, you have to memorize what they're supposed to say, and when they didn't say what they're supposed to say, some missionaries said, this is your script. What changes would I suggest? Let's be ourselves. I think certain things have to be centralized, like the doctrine, the purity of the doctrine, the worthiness of the convert, and the structure and organization. But the decentralized point has to do with how we do it. And people are as unique as snowflakes, and what you're going to be able to reach, you won't be able to reach, and what you will be able to reach, you won't be able to reach. So as we are working ourselves through this, we're going to be able to reach people in many, many ways where we would not be able to do it with a cookie-cutter formula. Where are the people from in the poll? Evenly dispersed throughout the whole United States population, including Alaska and Hawaii. We need to use religious terms that many other Christians understand them. Controversial issues. The church needs to equip us. I'm looking for a question here. Equip us with decent explanations why we practice polygamy, belief in Godhead, and so forth. He's given you some very good ideas. Watch them closely. Tapped into many good minds who are going to be able to give you those ideas. But it's the same thing. If a Baptist came up to you and talked about the Great Commission and the rapture, and he wants to witness and affirm, those are strange terms. Just like I want to bear my testimony is a strange term. I don't think that should ever be used anywhere except on the first Sunday of every month. Because it gives them the impression, what are we, in court? I'd like to say, I'll just tell you what I believe. Well, my take on that is, I don't know what your philosophy is, but my real philosophy would say, and use those kinds of introductory phrases instead of saying, I want to bear my testimony. So why has the church backed off from marketing the restoration of Christ's church? Again, because I think we're finding better ways to communicate. And we're finding out that if we just tell them who we are and very simple. It's Vince Lombardi. If you know the story of Vince Lombardi and the Green Bay Packers, every beginning of football season, he would stand up in front of his football players and say, gentlemen, this is a football. These are yard markers. Those are goal lines. Our goal is to get this thing across that line. You got it? In other words, he went back to the basics. Let's get back to the basics. We claim to be the reestablished original Christian church. If 14% know that now, what would happen if we had 28% who knew it, or 42% who knew it? The baptisms would take care of themselves. And I think we're getting away from a straight marketing situation because it's too statistics bound. Now, you're hearing a statistician tell you, get away from statistics. Let's get onto the qualitative side of things more than the quantitative. How do you feel about the LDS Church's official guidelines for doing missionary work called Preach My Gospel that has been approved by the Church's Correlation Committee? I like Preach My Gospel. Our firm was allowed to do some of the research that fed into it. Some of the ideas they had, I was using on my own mission in in opposition to what my supervising elder told me to do, because we tossed out the Mr. Brown things and we just developed lessons just exactly like Preach My Gospel telling us to do now. And if there are things in Preach My Gospel that the Lord doesn't want, eventually He's going to allow us to discover it. But the thing is, don't feel that you have to do the marketing part like the missionaries do, which is why so few people come back and continue to do a challenge or the push. They come back and they start doing themselves as they would do it, and it really comes down to the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. If we treat other people the way we would like to be treated, we're going to make an awful lot of good progress. Again, for those of you who missed any of the elements, I'll be out in the foyer. Be yourself, say something, allow the critics to give you an opportunity to defend the church and correct distortion. And the good part about it is we can all do it without standing on an orange crate or leaving our comfort zone. Thank you very much.